So I think we can get started. How about any questions related to what we did in lab today? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on lab stuff? All right. You should be into the integumentary system this week for lecture according to our schedule, and then next week skeletal system. So we certainly can talk about anything related to tissues and or integumentary. We reviewed a bit about the anatomy of the skin today. We looked at the skin model. We looked at the slide.
So what's the lab quiz on next week? Like what like specific things? Is it like 11, 12, 13, 14?
Yeah, I was going to send an email out because we didn't really talk much about that today. Ordinarily, we've always said that the lab quiz material would be over material since the preceding quiz. But in this case, we had a lab practical last Wednesday. I think what we'll probably do, and I'll again follow this up with an email because not everybody in class is here in Zoom. We'll have that quiz, lab quiz next week on the 10th over the exercises we did today and not over connective tissues and muscle and nerve, which we did last Wednesday after the practical. It's still a lot of material, I understand, but at least it takes tissues off the table.
So just like the bones and like the skull, like stuff that we did.
Yeah, well, 11 starts with integumentary system. And we looked at the model, we looked at the slide. 12 was over bone structure and classification, which we will be getting into in lecture in chapter 7. So I would look at chapter 7, the first part of that, and that should allow you to fill out figure 12.1, which is the long bone structure, and corresponds to one of the handouts that lists the various structures that pertain to this diagram. And then, of course, we had the osteon model, and there's this osteon diagram. So I would review compact bone, microscopic structures of compact bone. But a big part of the first, in the Zoom recording of chapter 7 in the text, will cover a lot of what is in exercise 12. 13 was just an introduction into the various bones of the appendicular and axial skeletons. And then, of course, 14 was the skull. So, there's a lot of material there. I would begin learning the bones of the skeleton. I would start getting into some of the structures of the skull that we went over. And I think the best way to study these different bones would be to use that handout that relates to exercises 14 through 17 and only focus on those terms that are in that handout. Because if you look in the lab book or in the lecture book, there are many more skeletal structures listed on those diagrams than you need to know. So I think to kind of pare down, what it is you need to focus on, it would be to follow those handouts, or that particular handout we started today on the skull. And probably the best way to do that would be to go to the diagrams in the lab book. So for example, today we did skull, right? And here we're looking at the inferior diagram. We referenced this several times today. And I think the thing to do would be to, circle those structures that pertain to what you need to know, and obviously look at the diagram first, but then go to the model, the plastic skull or the real skull, and locate those structures. So it's going to require, again, a little bit of outside review. You can do some of that at home, but obviously the skulls are not at home, they're at school. So trying to get in and looking at those would be really critical, and in preparation for the quiz next week, but even more importantly for the second practical coming up on the 31st of March. So that's still another 4 weeks away, but it'll be here before you know it.
In class, didn't you say there was one that like not to worry about? I didn't mark it.
The ethmoid bone, we did not go through some of the substructures, if you will, from that handout, because I just knew it was going to take me too much time to go through those. So I think you should know that the ethmoid is one of the bones. But in terms of knowing some of the subset structures, right, on that handout, you don't need to worry about that. Crista galli, perpendicular plate, don't worry about those. Nasal conchae, we talked a little bit about the inferior nasal conchae, and I did mention that there were a couple pairs of superior, conchae bones, or those curled bones. Those are part of the ethmoid, which are often broken off and you can't see them very well, but you have to look way up into the nasal region to find the ethmoid bone and to find those two pair of what are called nasal conchae. But they're often broken off in the real bone skulls. And even in the plastic casts, it's hard to cast them because they're so small and they're so fragile. But they curl. They curl. Yeah. So let those exercise 14, 15, 16, 17, guide you as you prepare for what to know for bones. I just think if I was living near Olean or in Olean, I would try to make time each Tuesday to come in and review. That's what I would do. And look at the models, look at the slides, look at whatever we've been reviewing. I just think that would be a really, really good idea if you can do that. Any more questions about lab material, lab stuff? Anything you'd like to go over? We went over those skull bones and structures quite quickly. No reason why we couldn't take more time now and look at those again if you'd like to do that. I just don't know where you are. We just had lab. You're probably, last thing you want to do is look at more lab stuff, but this is our chance to meet and review and talk and all that stuff. Or if there's anything in chapter 6, integumentary system, that you should have started by now, we can talk about any of those structures as well. Or, you tell me, what would you like to review? What would you like me to, go over, explain again if it's not quite making sense?
I have been, well, I guess I better ask, is for the integumentary, I'm sorry, I struggle with that. Are we gonna have to be able to like go on a slide and identify like all 5 layers of the epidermis like from a slide, or just like know that, just for, the purpose of the quiz?
Right. You don't need to be able to identify the 5 layers of the epidermis on a slide. I think you ought to be able to find the outermost layer, which is the stratum corneum. And I think you should know where to go to look for the stratum basale. And
Okay.
that's very easy to do, because remember, the stratum corneum is the outermost layer, and the stratum basale is the deepest layer closest to the basement membrane that separates the epithelium from the connective tissue. But you'd be very hard pressed to locate all those layers of the epidermis, even under the best of conditions, because some of them are actually very difficult to see. So I think deepest and most superficial layers should be pretty easy to do.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Sure. In lecture, I go through those 5 layers and we talk about them, and I show you some diagrams and so on and so forth. So I think you should be familiar with the names. Again, focusing perhaps on the deepest and the most superficial. But I don't want you to get all paranoid about having to know, a lot about the other 3. I do mention them. I think I referenced a table maybe, or a diagram. In fact, I do use that figure 6.3, and I show you where the lucidum is just below the corneum, and talk a little bit about those. But just know that there's 5 layers of the epidermis. They all have a name, stratum something. And the deepest layer, stratum basale, is where we have the melanocytes and also other cells there that are undergoing active cell division. And as those cells get further away from the blood supply in those dermal papillae, they undergo that keratinization process. They die, and they eventually, become spinosum, eventually become granulosum, eventually become part of the lucidum, and then finally become stratum corneum, only to be eventually shed away.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good question, Paige. Yeah. In many respects, watching or studying chapter 6 before looking at the slide of the integumentary system, or looking at the model of the integumentary system, might be the way to go. Again, I don't know where you guys are in your studying, but if the first time you heard about the skin was today, I would recommend getting into chapter 6, lecture, Zoom stuff, and then spending some time there, and then go back, and I think that'll make the lab exercise 11, I think it was, much less intimidating, perhaps. Yeah. Again, my goal as I teach the course, and it has always been something that I've been thinking about and I strive to do, is to present the material in lecture before lab. And often that happens, but it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes holidays can get in the way. Sometimes snow days can get in the way. Sometimes you just have to introduce this concept in lab now, because you can't later because of just what has to get covered. But I think I may have told you guys, I have taught courses where the way that the course was constructed, and I was just following what was given to me, the information was presented first in lab, and then a week or 2 later, sometimes it was hit in lecture, and I don't think that's a good way to go. So I avoid it at all costs. That's just me. But I think if I was a student, that's what I would want. The other thing that we could do is you could each come up with a question. Sometimes we call it the muddiest point. In other words, what in the last Zoom lecture that you watched or what in lab today that you heard just is confusing to you and you'd like to have clarification on. And one little exercise that some instructors will do at the beginning of a class or when things kind of become dead like they apparently are now is the question is asked of students, hey, write down on a piece of scrap paper the muddiest point, and we'll collect those and I'll just go through them and I'll answer them. You know, that can be done for review, you know, for example, or we can do that now. You can just give me the muddiest point in the chat. Some people are afraid to ask or feel like they're going to ask a dumb question or whatever, but guess what? There is no such thing as a dumb question.
Can we go over some of the bones again, like the names of them? Because I don't remember. I mean, I remember like phalanges and your femur, but the rest is new to me.
Yeah. So, Jolene, you're talking about just the overall appendicular and axial skeleton bones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, so let's do that. I am going to find a diagram. This will be chapter 7. I just don't have any idea why that PowerPoint would not load on the computer in the classroom today. I tried loading it 3 times, and I know it's big, but man, it just would not load. And even right now on my computer, it's working. It's slow, but it's a big file. It's 162 megabytes. That is like the biggest file. It's probably because I have all of the bones. Oh yeah, it's massive compared to most of the other chapters. The skin is 11 megabytes. This is like over 12 times as big. Maybe that's why it took so long, huh? Okay. Yeah, that's why it's so big. There's 217 slides. I left all of the bones in there thinking, well, maybe you guys would like to look at them. So I'm glad I did that. Okay, so let me find that diagram. Where is the diagram? There it is. So do you see that diagram? Now, what I could also try to do, if you would like, is find the unlabeled version, and we could fill in the bones themselves. I don't know what you'd like to do.
Sure.
Okay, so let me see if I can find that. I'm going to have to go to the publisher website. It should take me a minute here. I do have the link real quick, easy access. So that's figure 716. And I would like unlabeled. Might even be in the course shell now that I think about it. Could have gone there and looked. Chapter 7. This is one of the bigger chapters of the book. Just due to all the diagrams. All right, let's see what this is. That's what we want. Okay. I think we're looking now. All right. Now the bad thing about this diagram is there's no lines going to the individual bones, but that's okay. All right, so everybody see the anterior and posterior views? Yes? No? Like, can you see them?
Yes, I can see him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I can magnify this a little bit, which is great. So let's start here on the anterior view and just go down the line, and you tell me, you know, if you can, what bone we're talking about. And maybe we could like take turns or something. I don't know how you want to do this. Julian, are you driving?
No, I'm in my car.
I
I'm
know.
not driving.
Okay. Well, I had a student a couple weeks ago who was trying to do a schedule, make out his fall schedule while driving his car. And
Oh, wow.
I'm like, no, you're gonna pull over, or we're gonna redo this. You're not gonna be doing it
Yeah,
driving.
that sounds a little dangerous. Jeez.
Hey. Okay. So if you don't know this one, I think there's no hope for you.
Yeah.
Skull. We won't worry about the individual bones of the skull right now. We'll just get into that later if you want. Okay. This
Jawbone.
Mandible.
mandible,
Mandible.
right? This
Sternum.
sternum. Now we're going to talk about the three parts next week, but for now we'll just say sternum. Okay. How about this guy?
Clavicle, right?
Clavicle. Clavicle, right? This one,
Humerus.
humerus. How about this one right here?
Ulna.
Right. Let's have somebody else answer. How about this one?
Radius.
How do you know the difference?
The radius is by the thumb.
Right, comes off the thumb. And the radius will rotate. There's a head of the radius here. It's very round. And when you go to pronate and supinate your hand, which is this process, this is the supine position. This is the pronated position. So supination, pronation. The way you remember that is you get a bowl of soup. You hold it like this. Hold the soup with your hands like that. That's how you remember supine. So you learn something every day. When you go to pronate and supinate, the ulna stays stationary, doesn't move. The radius rotates to allow for those two movements. But you're right. If you think of it coming off the thumb, that's the radius. Okay. How about this cluster of bones here in the wrist? Anybody know what that one is?
Carpals.
Carpals, right. And then we come to 5 bones of the palm.
Phalanges.
No, not yet. Those are out here.
Metacarpals.
Metacarpals, right. So carpals, metacarpals. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 phalanges. 3 per finger except the thumb that has 2. All right. As long as we're in the appendicular skeleton, let's go down to this broad bone here. It goes by a couple of different names.
Hip bone? No.
That's the common name.
The pelvic bone.
Ilium.
You could use the term coxal bone or innominate bone. The ilium is one of the 3 fused bones here that make this bone up. So ilium is just one. So there's ilium, ischium, and pubis. All 3 make up the coxal, C-O-X-A-L, coxal bone, innominate bone. I mean, hip is listed in your book. It's again a rather generic term, but I guess we would accept it because it says that in the book. Now, what's this right here? Anybody know what this is? This in white. It's a connective tissue. It's between the 2 pubic bones. This is fibrocartilage called the symphysis pubis. There's also a fibrocartilage up here between the vertebrae. Remember us talking about that? The intervertebral discs made of fibrocartilage. All right, what's this bone? Right here,
Femur.
right? How about this one?
Patella.
Patella. This one,
Fibula.
fibula, right?
Tibia.
Tibia.
Did you say fibia?
Tibia.
No, no, tib, T, not fib. Tib, tibia, tibia. There's no fibia bone. There's fibula, and there's tibia. Okay, make sure you know the difference. So tibia, T-I-B-I-A, tibia, and fibula, F-I-B-U-L-A. Then we come down to some ankle bones.
Tarsals.
Tarsals, right? T-A-R-S-A-L-S, tarsals. 5 metatarsals. And of course, what are these?
Phalanges.
Right, how many phalanges in a foot? How many phalanges in your hand?
5.
No.
Altogether 10.
14.
Do I hear 16? Go on once, go on twice. No, come on, it can't be all. Now, why is it not 5? John's like, well, I have 5 fingers. There they are. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not what I'm asking. Because there's more than 1 phalange per toe or per finger, right? There's 3 phalanges per toe, except for the thumb and the big toe, which have 2. So 4 times 3 plus 2 equals 14. There's 14 phalanges in each foot. There's 14 phalanges in each hand. 3, 3, 3, 3, 2. 2, 3, 3, 3, 3. Okay. 3 times 4, 12, plus 2, 14. How many phalanges do you have in your body? We'll get out the calculator.
28.
Times 2.
Wrong. I said, how many phalanges in your body? Well, maybe you don't have 2 arms. That would be correct then. You've got
56.
14, you got 56. 14
Oh,
times
yeah, I
4.
was thinking 1 foot, 1 hand.
Everybody understand the math? 14 in each foot and each hand. Most people have 2 of each. That would be 56. Yeah, total phalanges in your body. Yeah. Now that's part of the 206 bones, right? If you think about it, most of the bones technically, number-wise, are in the hands and feet. Yeah. Okay, going back up. Let's talk about some of the axial skeleton. We mentioned the skull, we mentioned the mandible, and then of course the sternum. And then of course, what else do we need to talk about? Well, how about all these guys? Right now, we're just going to call them the what?
Vertebrae.
The vertebrae. What's this structure here called, do you know? It's a fused set of vertebrae called the blank.
The coccyx.
Well, this is the sacrum. The
Suture.
coccyx is going to be these 4 or 5 fused bones at the very, very inferior tip of the coccyx. Okay, they're separate. Here's the coccyx above, and then these 4 or 5 bones at the very tip here, they're fused often. This is the coccyx bones. Here you see the vertebrae as well from a posterior view, and we can see the intervertebral disc here in white, kind of in between some of those larger lumbar vertebrae. But we'll be learning the lumbar, the thoracic, and then cervical. There are different kinds. There are different kinds of vertebrae. What else haven't we talked about with respect to axial would be, of course, these guys. The ribs, yeah. And there's another bone here that's hiding. You can't see it. It's underneath the tongue, behind the mandible. It's a U-shaped bone. Freya was asking about it today.
The hyoid.
Hyoid, right, the hyoid bone. Yeah, that's part of the axial skeleton as well. I'll show you that next Tuesday. It was on the skeleton. I don't know if you saw it there. It's hanging there by a piece of metal. And so those are the major bones of the skeleton. See, it's not too bad. Just learning the basic bones. Was that helpful, Jolene?
Yes, thank you.
Uh-huh. Any questions on those bones? Do you think you could label the diagram there in exercise 13, was it? I forget what number. I think it was 13. I think a lot of you could quite easily label these. Spend some time on those.
I think the skull is going to be the hardest part with all the like sutures and stuff.
Yeah. The sutures, the foramina, the condyles, the fossae. You're exactly right. And the best way to really see those is to spend some time looking for them. We went through that list quickly today. And next week, we will go through a lot of bones. I won't say quickly, it's going to seem quick to you, but you know, we've got to get through those exercises. So we will not be dilly-dallying a whole lot. We'll get through all of them. But again, the key to really doing well on those practicals and the quizzes is to get in there and look at those things a couple times. Now, if you want, we could take a look at the skull and go over some of those structures that we started looking at today.
That would be awesome.
Okay, let's do that.
I have a quick question. I think one thing that's kind of intimidating is that the adult skull and the fetal skull look so different. Like as far as like the infant skull, are we mostly just going to need to know the fontanelles, or are we going to have to be able to? Okay,
No.
thank you.
Just fontanelles. Yep. It's interesting though, if you look at the fetal skull, you can see the zygomatic arch. It's tiny. You can see the future parietal and occipital bones. You can see the future adult zygomatic bone or nasal bone. So it's interesting to study the development of bones by seeing them at that very young stage of development. But yeah, the only purpose we have of those fetal skulls is to look at the 6 fontanelles.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let us go to the skull. Do you see the skull there? Or no, maybe I didn't share it yet. There we go. Now you see it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we can do is we can take that list in exercise 14, this one that we started today, right? And then the back half and identify some structures. So structures on this particular view of the skull that you would want to know would be, I wonder if I could, gosh, can I color code this? Never tried this before. I think I might be able to. Well, I can just color it. Maybe I'll just do that. I'll just color the words. How's that? Can you see the red parietal? Yeah, okay. So let me just kind of go through and color code some of these terms because I remember what's on that exercise. Now, the vast majority of these are going to be red. So don't be surprised here if I continue to do this. In fact, this one's going to be red. This is going to be red. These are all bones that we've identified. The perpendicular plate of the ethmoid, this was a structure that I said you could omit from the ethmoid listing, if you remember, so we're not going to worry about that one. We identified the infraorbital foramen. We talked about the vomer. Remember what I called this? I called this the what bone? I walked around and showed it to you.
The Dorito.
The Dorito bone, yeah, or the shark fin bone. It's this very thin bone that helps to provide separation of the nasal septum. It's way in the back. I'll show you a different diagram of it in just a few minutes. So I think you should know vomer. We talked about the mandible. We did not talk about this foramen, so don't worry about that. We did show the nasal. We did show the sphenoid. We did not get into the middle and superior nasal conchae. We talked about them a little bit as being these round, sort of rounded bones, curled bones that help to speed up the air so that particulates could be more efficiently deposited on the mucous membrane of those bones. Here's ethmoid. We did talk about, or zygomatic, excuse me. We talked about that one. The inferior nasal conchae, I think we talked about that one. That's a standalone bone, while the superior and middle conchae are part of the ethmoid. And then maxilla we did, and mental foramen, we looked at that. We found that easily. So a lot of these structures we were looking for. I'm not exactly sure that's what you wanted me to do here. Is this helpful? Or
Yeah,
what?
I'm highlighting them in my book as you go, so this is very helpful.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Let's see, if I go to the next diagram, they're going to stay red, so that's good. Here's a lateral view. This is also, of course, in your textbook on 217. And it might be easier for me just to cross out those you don't need to know as opposed to me highlighting them. I don't know. I'm looking through the list and I'm seeing this we did not specifically talk about. It's on the list, I think, but I did not go over the coronoid process, so I'm not going to worry about that one. I think I can do a double cross through here, can I? And then I think all of these other structures we looked for. Now, you're going to want to really spend some time looking at these sutures. There's quite a few different sutures, right? There's the coronal between the frontal and the parietals. There's the sagittal suture, which I can't show you, between the two parietals here down the center. There's the squamosal or squamous suture between the temporal bone here in red and the parietal in blue. There's the lambdoid suture between occipital and parietal bones. They're not hard to find. They're quite easy to find, actually, but you got to look for them. So the exploded skull model that I showed you, of course, is where somebody did literally separate all the cranial bones and some of the facial bones from one another at those suture sites. That's what makes that exploded skull so interesting. You can see the very jagged edges of the sutures. You know, when they pull them apart, how they did that, I don't know. They probably dissolved the connective tissue and then gently separated the bones, but they're intricate, they're gorgeous, beautiful structures, the sutures, amazing. They interlock really tightly. And then we also looked quite a bit, didn't we, at this inferior view of the skull. This is looking from below up now. So we can see the foramen magnum here at the bottom, where this brainstem extends downward toward you and eventually forms into the spinal cord. As I look through this listing of terms, we don't need to worry about this one. We did not talk about the Palatine process of maxilla, so I won't, it's on the list, I think, but you can omit that one as well. Median Palatine suture, again, don't worry about that. Greater Palatine foramen, I didn't mention it. I said you could look for that to help find the Palatine bone, but you don't need to know that. Whoops, what happened there? Foramen lacerum, foramen ovale, those can be omitted. You don't need to know those. Foramen spinosum, likewise, you can omit that. Carotid canal, jugular foramen, all these next group, actually all the way down to stylomastoid foramen, you can ignore those, cross those out. I'm not going to go about crossing them out here, it takes too much time. So those cross out. And the remaining ones, this one you should know, this one you should know. Condylar canal, no, don't worry about that. Occipital, obviously, yes. Everybody good with those?
Hang on.
I mean, I can cross them out if you want me to.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I appreciate it.
Come on. Why is this doing this? I don't know, I can't get that one to cross out for some reason. Okay, we're good with that one?
Yep.
Okay, so here's these are views of the sphenoid. That was that funny, dark, bright, actually bright red bone I walked around the room and showed you. And so it looks like a bird or a bat, sort of. So it lies inside the skull. This is a view from above looking down. And you see a little bit of it here in purple. So there's, of course, one on this side, one on the opposite side. That, what you'd be seeing there would be on the underside of this surface. If I could take my arrow and go underneath this bone, that would be what you'd see from the sides. So this is internal. So that's sphenoid. Here's another view looking down into the skull from above. So we've taken what's called the vault. That's what the British call the vault. Imagine me taking this skull and cutting it like right here with a buzzsaw, right across right here, right? Take this off and look down in. All I can think of is Silence of the Lambs when I say that. You know the movie? Where he eats the guy's brain while he's sitting there. Ever seen that movie?
Uh-huh.
That's creepy. Great movie though. It's funny how you don't forget those scenes. Here's the hypophyseal fossa, right where the triangle or arrow is. What sits in that hypophyseal fossa?
The pituitary gland.
Right, pituitary gland. Now I know it says sella turcica, but really what they should have done is they should have expanded this. I don't know if I can do this quickly or not. They should have done something like this. Oh, come on. Come on, it's not showing a little. The sella turcica is like this whole structure here. What is sella turcica literally translated into? Do you remember? Sella turcica.
Something saddle, right?
Yeah, something saddle. Turks. Turk.
Oh.
Like Turkish, Turk's saddle. Turk's saddle. So there's Turk's saddle. It's this whole structure here. Where you sit your butt down into the saddle, that's the hypophyseal fossa. It's not on this sheet. I don't see any term, but that's where it is. Okay. What other structures here should you be aware of? Well, frontal bone, sphenoid bone, temporal bone, parietal bone, occipital bone, foramen magnum. So actually all of these, don't worry about. On the left side, don't worry about those. You should know the bones: frontal, sphenoid, temporal, parietal, occipital, foramen magnum, sella turcica. But understand the view. This is looking down after having removed the vault. This is pointing out the various sinuses. Oops. Notice frontal, ethmoid, sphenoid, and maxillary sinuses. The maxillary are probably the largest of the, I don't know how many there are, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. This is a very interesting view. It's kind of hard to explain how it's been cut, but if you can imagine you know, this view, and if I were to cut, if I were to take and slice right, like right on down here, zoop right on down like that, okay? And then look at that from the back. Look at that section that I just cut with the saw. That is kind of what this shows. So here's the teeth embedded in the maxilla, looking from the back of the skull forward. Here's where your eyes would be. This, of course, is frontal. The frontal lobes of the brain would lie in here, you know, the cerebrum. You see zygomatic here on the sides. But what's really cool is this shows you the position of that funny vomer bone I was telling you about earlier, the Dorito bone. And then this is the ethmoid, which I didn't spend much time on because it was just hard to explain where it was, but it's located kind of centrally in the nasal region. And that's where we have some of those sinuses in these little openings here. That's what's shown here in pink, the sinuses of the ethmoid bone. And then here's that inferior nasal conchae, those paired curled bones that we saw earlier when we looked at the skull from the anterior view. So right here, this stuff in blue, see them? They're curled. There you can see them in blue here. So this is really an interesting view. Mandible, we've already talked about mandible. We described the mental foramen here, one on each side. And again, if we're talking about more than one, we would use the term foramina. So you have two mental foramina, you have two mandibular foramina. You only see one. The other one is on the inside of this side. Occipital, or I'm sorry, mandibular condyles. What do they fit into? Anybody remember? The mandibular condyles fit into the what? What bone? Can you tell me what bone they fit into?
Is it the temporal?
It was the temporal bone, specifically the mandibular fossae of the temporal bone. Very good. And I can show you that again. It's hard to show it because of the fact it's a depression, but if you go back to this view here, there'd be one fossa right here that one of the condyles would fit into, and the other condyle would fit in over here of the mandible. It's like a little socket that it fits into. And then, you know, with respect to the fetal skull, we talked about the anterior fontanelle. We talked about the posterior fontanelle. Here we see them from above. We talked about the two anterolateral or sphenoidal fontanelles and the two posterolateral or mastoid fontanelles. But getting back to Paige's comment earlier, do we need to know the fetal skull other than the fontanelles? The answer is no, but look at what they've done here. They've color-coded the zygomatic, the sphenoid, the temporal, the mandible, the nasal, the lacrimal. You know, that's kind of cool. You can find all those even in a fetal skull, of course. Gosh, I think we went through a lot of them, a lot of the terms, didn't we? Any specific diagrams you'd like to go over or reference? This, of course, is all in your book too, but now do understand you can go into the PowerPoint. In fact, what I'll do is I will save this PowerPoint and I'll just upload it as chapter 7. So if you go into this, you're going to see what I changed here in terms of the color. If you want to, I mean, you've already made notes, I know, but I'll just save this and post it, repost it. It'll basically overwrite what I have there now with the red font versus the black. So you can find these just by downloading or looking at the PowerPoint. That's where I pulled this up from Blackboard.
So the stuff in the red is what we're going to need to know, and the stuff in the black we don't have to bother with.
Yeah, no, I didn't go through each of these diagrams and do that, you know.
Right.
Right. But for
But
many
it's
of
on
them, we did.
it's on 14 that handout.
Exactly. We went through most all of these. The only one that I couldn't get to cross out was this silly one here. I don't know why it's giving me grief, but I cannot access the font option here to do that. Oh, now you'd let me. No, still not there. That's weird. And again, it's not like you have to look at all these diagrams because we didn't go into that much detail. So, you know, there's a large number of these that you're not even going to have to worry about or think about having to look at. But several are very beneficial. Again, the frontal view, the lateral view, the inferior view, those are pretty important. The view from above with the vault removed, that's a really important view. I think the diagrams that show the various sinuses, that is a good one to look at. And I think these are interesting. I don't know that you have to look at these, but again, they give you a better sense of, you know, what does the sphenoid look like if you cut the skull sagittally and looked on the right hand side. Well, there you see frontal, I see parietal, I see occipital, I see temporal, I see sphenoid, I see Hyoid bone, I see half of the mandible, I see part of the maxilla, I see nasal, you know, I see styloid process here. There's a lot of cool stuff to see. This is the opening from the right-hand side of the skull leading into the right ear. That's what that hole represents, of course, but it's on the other side of it, right? We're just seeing it as it would come out the temporal bone from the center of the skull, brain area. I think the artist did a fine job on some of these diagrams. It's hard to depict three-dimensionality in a two-dimensional world, isn't it? And the other thing that I was just thinking about as I say that, there's some real cool stuff you can download free on, like on my iPad. I have a skull, I forget what the program was, but you can like rotate the skull in any possible direction you want. Look at it from below, top, bottom. Oh, there's some really cool free stuff you can get. That would be very, very neat to look at. If you have an iPad or, you know, you guys have iPhones, just Google like skull or something. I'm sure you'll have a bunch of free apps you can just download if you want to. I just know that one on my iPad is so interesting. You can zoom in and out, zoom out, right? Yeah, it's very cool.
So basically, like on the lab quiz next week, like how would you ask like questions about like the skull? Is there just going to be like a diagram basically?
Well, I can put a diagram on. I haven't written the quiz yet, so I can't even give you specifics, but I will probably have a couple stations set up of the skull, or maybe I'll have a skin model there asking you to identify a structure on the model. There's not going to be 10 stations or anything like that, so don't freak out about that. But I like to put a couple stations on the quizzes, just so that you get a sense of what to expect when we have the practical. Diagrams certainly would be a good way to test your knowledge on structures.
Okay, because like with the tissues, you know, like we could, like you can ask us about like their function or something. So like really it's just like knowing the bone and like the name of the bone, like where it is. Like I just didn't know like how we would like do that.
Yeah, well, you're right. Say the vast majority are going to be labeling or identification. One question I could ask now that we've talked about it, that would be a non-station, a non-diagram question would be, how many phalanges in your left hand? Right? I mean, you all know it's 14. Now, that actually would be an unfair question to ask now that I think about it, because we didn't talk about the appendicular skeleton yet. So for those that aren't in class, of course, maybe that would be a fair question, because that's what you get for not coming to class. Yeah. Is that being mean of me to do that? No? How about one question worth 20 points? How many phalanges in your right hand? Boy.
20 points? We take that.
Yeah, we'll double it. We'll make it 20. And then anybody who's not here is going to be like really mad at us because we asked a question that didn't get covered in lab. No.
Maybe you should make it just like a bonus, like an extra point or two.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Okay. Right, an extra credit question. Yes, I think that's fair. I'll do that. Where was I with all this?
Good question.
Now, John, don't forget that it's extra credit. You'll be the one to be like, I'm pretty sure it's 54.
You don't know me. You do not know me, young lady.
Oh, you were asking about quiz questions, yeah. So yeah, a lot of diagram, a lot of identification, a couple stations put on there. I'll put a skull there. I'll put a skin model there, question on the skin model. I'm not going to ask you a skin slide model or a skin slide question, at least on the quiz, but on the practical that you might see a slide on the skin. Yeah, I mean, I certainly get, if I was you, it's like, there's so much to know. How can you expect us to know all this, right? That's what you're thinking. I know that's what you're thinking. So you can't know everything, but you want to try to study as much of everything as you can. And the other thing that I will always say again and again is, if you can come to lab next Wednesday and feel super confident about exercises 11, 12, 13, and 14, that's the goal. Because when I meet with you next week and we do 15, 16, and 17, this list triples, okay? Because we're doing the rest of the axial and all of the appendicular. So if you can make a goal of trying your best to get the anatomy down as best you can next Wednesday, this next surge of terms isn't going to be as overwhelming to you as if you didn't work hard at trying to get this down, because then you got a whole bunch of stuff you got to get down. You know what I'm saying? So small bite-sized pieces. That's how you have to approach school, I think, in general, whether it's A&P or history or whatever. You know, if you wait until the exam and you cram the night before, which I know a lot of people do, and some people are successful at that, depending upon the discipline, you can't do that really well in A&P. It's hard to cram for A&P. You can cram for psych. You can cram for Soc. Not to pick on those disciplines, but it's typically not as difficult as a course like this would be, just because the terminology is so much more vast in here. So try to get a firm foundation and build upon that each week. Firm. That's the goal. If you set up aside or set up up a crumbly foundation because you put a little bit of time in, but not as much as you know you should have, that's going to be a self-defeating thing down the road. I don't know. That's kind of the way I look at it anyway. So we have a few more minutes left. Anything else you want to review? Questions? All right, well, again, I'll stay in the Zoom room here for another 10 minutes or so. If you guys want to talk one-on-one or whatever. Otherwise, I guess we'll see you in review, some of you, Tuesday. Okay,
Thank you.
you bet.
So 15, wait, hold on. So on this sheet,
Hang on one second, John. I'm going to stop recording here. Okay, I'll be right back. Hang on.
okay.